When they desperately needed cash 15 years later, I showed them my sister's fancy Instagram feed and then ignored their messages. I'm not really sure when things started to feel weird. It didn't happen all at once, you know? There wasn't any explosive fight or anything like that. Instead, it was more like a gradual understanding that kind of snuck up on me during everyday life. It was the way my mother would phone me in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon at around 3 o'clock and ask if I could come over and lend a hand at the store, or the vague comments my father would make about how it would be better if I were around more. It was weird to realize all of this. When they made requests, it didn't seem like an actual question. It felt more like a subtle order, put in a casual way, as if it was something I was just supposed to do. At first, I didn't give it much thought. I was 25 then, just starting to make some progress in the technology industry, designing apps, experimenting with new software, getting noticed for my abilities. My dream job was finally within my grasp, the type of job that people typically strive for years, and here I was on the verge of finally having it. But my parents, well, they just didn't understand. I don't think they ever truly did. It started out in a fairly sneaky way. They never just plainly told me, "Jacob, come and run the store." It was more like a gentle hint laced with some guilt. It felt like they were requesting my assistance, not my entire life's path. They'd call about the store. There was this long-standing family shop where they sold everything under the sun, from souvenirs to odds and ends, and I'd usually end up spending an afternoon helping out. It was mainly because my folks were getting older and I was the one they could count on. My sister, Scarlett, was off doing whatever she did, and the expectation was that I was the one who would step up and take over. That initial time I agreed to pitch in, it seemed like no big deal, just a simple favor. I took a few hours away from my work, threw on an old t-shirt, and made my way to the shop. Honestly, it was a pleasant change of scenery. Even though I enjoy my job, it sometimes felt like my world was just monitors and programming, so it was nice to be around actual people, to talk directly with them, and to be in reality. But when I walked into the store, something felt a little off. Not terrible, but just not quite right. It wasn't just the smell of the old wood floors or the dusty shelves, or even their lackluster attempts at sprucing things up. It was the way my dad looked at me, almost like I'd missed something unspoken. He said, "Glad you're here, son," as if he had been anticipating my arrival for a long time. I gave a nod, and I tried to focus on getting the shelves organized. As the afternoon progressed, I began to understand just how much pressure was on me to take on everything, basically. My dad would ask me things like, "Could you manage the ordering for next week?" Or, "You would be really good at the inventory." I tried to downplay it. I'd say, "I'm just helping out for today," trying to keep the mood light. But truthfully, I knew my parents were asking for a lot more than just a bit of assistance. I found myself spending most of my afternoons there. They were gently nudging me, suggesting I spend more time assisting them. Truthfully, a part of me agreed. It seemed like the right thing to do. My folks were aging. The family business was struggling to stay afloat, and who else would take over if not me? I was the son, the one destined to continue the family tradition. But simultaneously, my dream job, the one I'd toiled relentlessly for, the one that was starting to finally become fruitful, was slowly disappearing each time I chose to assist at the shop. To be candid, that feeling of obligation began to surface quickly. Whenever I attempted to leave the store earlier than planned, I'd receive that glance from my mother. You know, that classic expression. It's the look that conveyed everything without uttering a word. The one that caused you to feel like you, fallen short of expectations you weren't even aware of. It was always, "Jacob, why don't you stay a little while longer? You're really quite capable." And then there was Scarlett. I couldn't begin to tell you how often my mom would casually remark, "Oh, Scarlett's off exploring herself again." I'm not sure why it always got to me, but it did. It wasn't that I didn't cherish my sister. I absolutely did. But she had always been the free-spirited one, the one who pursued her desires without any real repercussions. While I was stuck at the store, my sister was on the move, encountering new people, enjoying life and discovering herself in places that. The place seemed more captivating than anywhere I'd experienced over the last half-decade. I was putting in 40 hours a week at a tech job that I actually enjoyed, and then I'd spend my evenings at the store. I was managing inventory, supervising staff, and basically doing everything I could to keep the business running. Meanwhile, Scarlett was sharing pictures of her travels, with most of them showcasing Bali sunsets and her enjoying drinks in Paris. Each time I scrolled through her Instagram, this uncomfortable feeling would grip my chest. How could she be living this type of life while I was trapped here just trying to keep everyone afloat? One day, after a long shift at the store, I completely lost it. I brought up the situation with my mom. "Mom, why is it always me doing this? Why don't you ask Scarlett?" She hesitated, and I could see her expression soften. She didn't look guilty, but weary, I suppose. "Oh, Jacob," she said. She's always been the artistic one. She's finding her path. You're the practical one, the dependable one. We depend on you, dear. This store, it isn't just work, it's a family tradition. A legacy. Those words stayed with me as I headed home that evening. I attempted to shove them away, but it felt as though I had been given a prison sentence. A legacy I never wanted. An obligation I wasn't prepared to accept. I kept assuring myself that this was only a temporary thing, that I'd lend a hand for a short time and then return to my ideal career. Yet, after each time I assisted, I lingered. My dream job began to feel like something I might need to abandon to rescue the shop, to help my folks. However, what truly irked me, what I couldn't quite get rid of, was the impression that Scarlett wasn't sacrificing anything. Possibly it was possible. My parents might be allowing her to avoid any responsibilities. I couldn't stop dwelling on the thought, and that's when it dawned on me. I was no longer just helping out. I was involved in something far more expansive than I'd ever conceived of, and honestly, I wasn't certain I had a say in the matter anymore. Thus, gradually but surely, I found myself entrenched in the family business, sacrificing my aspirations in the name of obligation. It wasn't a major decision, just a sequence of minor concessions. Each one was somewhat simpler to agree to than the one before. I wanted to share an update. It began as a minor, persistent worry. Initially, I couldn't pinpoint it, just an indistinct unease whenever I drove home from the shop. By then, I'd been working there for several years, long enough for it to no longer feel like a temporary arrangement, long enough for the constraints to become somewhat more pronounced. Nevertheless, that slight, irritating sensation that things weren't entirely correct persisted. Initially, I attributed it to sheer exhaustion. It was demanding to handle a full-time job, manage a store, and still strive to maintain a vestige of my previous life. But subsequently, it started occurring more frequently. Those little everyday moments, my mom, with a huge grin on her face, would tell me, "Jacob, we're so fortunate to have you here. You're the only one who ever gets anything accomplished." And that's when it would hit me, that familiar, sickening feeling in my gut. She wasn't mistaken, unfortunately. I was the only one who even seemed to be concerned with keeping our family's business from failing. My sister, Scarlett, who was busy on a continuous journey of self-discovery since finishing high school, was living her life to the fullest, taking vacations, visiting art galleries, and getting all the adoration and acclaim for her online persona. Meanwhile, I was trapped in a never-ending cycle of working 12-hour days, having to deal with clients who didn't give a flip about the store, or the effort I poured into it. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when that simmering resentment began, but one thing was obvious. I wasn't simply lending a hand anymore. I was completely managing the store. And Scarlett, she had the gall to post about finally discovering her life's goal while I was working behind the scenes, trying to handle invoices and pay all the bills. Whenever I'd scroll through her Instagram, it felt like a punch in the gut. I'd see luxurious meals, rooftop parties, and all kinds of vacations. She even uploaded a photo from an art show opening in Paris, looking like she was existing in some kind of unbelievable Instagram dream while I was up to my eyeballs in inventory spreadsheets. Seriously, Jacob, shouldn't you think about yourself more often? You're working yourself to death for something you didn't even pick to do. That was a line Scarlett had said to me, totally out of the blue. I had no idea how much the situation was impacting me. She uttered those words with that familiar smile of hers, which was a combination of innocent hopefulness and complete lack of connection to the situation. She simply wasn't grounded enough to grasp the extent of what was happening. I never mentioned it to my mom and dad. I didn't want to be the one who whined and came across as unappreciative. They relied on me, and I was genuinely doing all I could to help them out. Yet each time they asked me to stay later or take on another duty, it felt like they were distancing me more and more from the life I had put so much effort into creating. That was the crux of the issue. I couldn't allow it to continue any longer. That fantastic tech job I used to adore had become a distant, hazy thought. My former coworkers were getting promoted, heading up groundbreaking projects. I had even watched some of them release apps that I had helped with when we were in college. I felt like I was lagging, stalled in place while everyone else sped forward. I began to feel it at work too. My boss, Ben, a person who had always been a great source of support, began to view me with a subtly altered expression. He'd walk past my workspace and remark things like, "You're running yourself ragged, aren't you?" I'd just smile and shake my head, trying to convey that everything was good, but I could tell he was let down. I could practically read the disapproval in his gaze. And it was more than just the fact that I wasn't getting my tasks done anymore. It was that I wasn't myself anymore. I wasn't the individual who got excited about what the future of tech held. I was the person employed at a shop, tasked with handling spreadsheets and trying to keep things afloat. Then one night, I listened in as my father spoke with a vendor on the telephone. He was going through some financial figures, attempting to negotiate an arrangement to ensure the store's rent could be paid for a little while longer. The phrases were all too recognizable, painfully so. I'd heard him use the identical words when speaking to the bank years before. Similar reasons, identical. Assurances. We just require a bit more time, he said, his tone almost begging. Jacob's been a big help, he mentioned, but we couldn't pull this off without your support. Hearing him say that really affected me. I was the one keeping everything from falling apart. There wasn't any we in his words, it was all about me. It was no longer only a family enterprise, it had become my life, my burden. And still, each time Scarlett visited, she'd appearing stylish and put together, relating tales of her recent trip to the beach or describing how she'd spent a week exploring her creative side in some faraway place. It felt like an insult, every single occasion. I'd be locked in the store with dark circles beneath my eyes, managing frustrated patrons, while she was gathering online approval and admiration. It wasn't simply envy. I also felt furious. She had the freedom to lead a simple life while I was left to clean up the mess. One evening, after an especially difficult day, I found myself gazing at the mountain of invoices that demanded payment. It was becoming increasingly difficult to rationalize this, not only to others but even to myself. How much longer could I keep? I was really struggling. The little wins of keeping the shop open didn't feel good anymore. They felt like a failing boat I was trying to save, and I knew it was going to eventually sink. Then Scarlett came home for the holidays, like always. I didn't even bother to ask about her. Her response was always the same old story. Oh, just existing, doing things slowly. But when we had dinner that night, something changed. My dad mentioned something about us all helping out more, and Scarlett simply agreed, like she was being told to do the dishes. Perhaps later she mentioned, with a smile as if it wasn't any big deal, and I just lost it. What's wrong with you? I just shouted before I could stop myself. You're out there living your life, your Instagram life, and here I am dealing with everything. Scarlett looked surprised. My mother gave me a disapproving glance, but I didn't care. I'm the one working hard every single day to keep this place open, and you just arrive when it's easy. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The bitterness had been growing for ages, and at that moment it all came pouring out. The room was silent. My mother looked like she didn't understand and was uncomfortable, but Scarlett, she just stared at me like I'd turned into something strange. Jacob, I don't understand what you expect from me, she stated. I'm not like you. I don't desire the same kind of life you have. And honestly, I don't think you'd want to hear what was in my mind. It was the initial instance where her words actually managed to pierce through the haze of bitterness I carried. It wasn't a big, dramatic admission of fault. It was simply authentic. I was speechless in that moment. I couldn't muster a reply. Consequently, I remained quiet. However, as I made my way back to my apartment that evening, a realization hit me. The animosity wasn't exclusively centered on the store. It was about me. I had allowed myself to be completely consumed by this enterprise, by the family's desires, and I had no idea what I was clinging to anymore. Something significant was about to shift. I just wasn't certain what the change would be. My final reflection on this. So many years had passed. Years where I dedicated myself to something that consistently failed to reciprocate. Years where I felt as though I was gradually disappearing beneath the surface of the everyday struggle of trying to keep the family business afloat. Throughout all that time, Scarlett was out there enjoying her life, while I was working myself to the breaking point, questioning how everything had gone sideways. Though I will confess, there were still occasions where I thought, perhaps this time my folks would finally take note. Perhaps on this occasion they'd acknowledge the sacrifices I was making. That's the nature of family. You cherish them, you want to support them, but there's always that lingering query in your subconscious. Am I truly important to them, or am I merely a fallback option? It wasn't until I received a phone call that things truly reached their climax. I was at my place, trying to decompress after a day spent at the office. I'd relocated to a small apartment in the city, removed from the shop, far from. I was trying to find relief from everything that had been making me feel trapped and overwhelmed. It was a brief moment of freedom, but I grabbed onto it. I was checking my emails when my phone vibrated on the table in front of me. I glanced at the display. It was a message from my mother. I didn't really give it much thought. I guessed it was just another one of those, making sure you're all right type of calls. I answered the phone, anticipating her typical relaxed, everyday chat. "Hey, Jacob," she said, her voice sounding tense. "I have to speak with you, it's vital." This immediately caught my attention. My mom had never, ever sounded so serious. My immediate thought was that something was seriously off. Perhaps they were unwell. Maybe something went wrong with their business. I prepared myself for whatever news was coming, even though I couldn't predict what it was. "We're in trouble, Jacob. The store, it's struggling. We require help, and I really don't know who else to ask." My stomach sank. I could faintly make out my dad's voice in the background saying something like, "Tell him about our situation." The urgency in their voices was something I hadn't encountered in so long, and it was impossible to dismiss. "What do you mean?" I inquired, trying to keep my composure. "What's happening?" "We're behind on the rent," my mother said, her voice shaky. "The debt is growing, and we're running low on funds. I'm feeling the pressure, Jacob, because we need some cash. We're completely out of options, at least in my mind." My initial reaction was to step in and help, as I always do. The old, familiar part of me, the one who had dedicated years to family, felt that urge to assist them, but something inside of me broke. It wasn't solely about the money that they needed this time. It was about me. Again, they wanted me to intervene, to make everything right, to be their fallback. But the thing that truly gave me pause wasn't the housing payments, or the other expenses, or even the thought of rescuing them financially once again. It was the understanding that came over me. That I didn't owe them anything at this stage. I had given them everything, and still I kept thinking about Scarlett in the background. She was out there enjoying her life while I was burdened by this situation. She was doing wonderfully. It was almost ridiculous how perfect her life seemed to be. However, they never asked her for any kind of help. They never asked her to take charge of the situation. They never expected her to contribute in any way. I didn't expect to do what I was about to do, but something changed within me. I just didn't want to be the dependable one anymore. I'm worn out by the fact that they always leaned on me. Exhausted by how they never asked Scarlett to help. "Mom, Dad," I stated. My tone softer now. "You should really chat with Scarlett. She's doing great, isn't she?" There was a period of silence. My mom's voice cracked slightly as she said back, "Jacob, please don't act like this. She's preoccupied with her. Life isn't keeping her occupied. She's clearly not." I ended the call abruptly. I've been checking her Instagram feed. I've noticed all the travel, the gatherings she attends. It's obvious she's living a life of leisure, and I'm always the one who has to help out. She seemed like she was trying to collect her thoughts, but I wasn't finished yet. "I've been working hard, Mom, for many years. I've given up so much for this family. I've put aside my goals, my own precious time, and I've suffered for it. Why am I the one always there to pick up the pieces when things go wrong?" Well, I'm through with that. I ended the call without waiting for her to say anything back. My heart was racing and my hands were clammy, but I didn't feel any remorse. It didn't feel like I'd done something wrong at all. For the first time in ages, I actually felt some control. It was over. I wouldn't be the one they relied on anymore, and that fact was both liberating and a bit nerve-wracking. But I wasn't ready to be done yet. I inhaled deeply and then checked Instagram. I looked through her feed with its flawless pictures, amazing trips, late-night get-togethers with friends, and beautiful places. That was everything I'd been sacrificing for, everything I'd missed out on while I was stuck dealing with the family stuff. And I realized that if I wanted to make a statement, I had to be clear. I captured a screenshot of one of her posts, a photo of her relaxing in a private villa in Bali. I was lounging by the pool, cocktail in hand, thinking, blessed hash living my best life, as the picture popped up. Without a second thought, I sent it on to my parents, attaching a quick note. "If you're strapped for cash, maybe Scarlett could help. She appears to be doing great." Then I shut the app. Settling back in my seat, I felt a weird feeling of peace come over me. I had no idea what might come next. I didn't worry about it. I wasn't going to let them control me any longer. The time passed incredibly slowly after that. Nothing. No frantic phone calls from them. No apologies, nothing at all, just quiet. It felt like they were expecting me to break, hoping I'd bite and call them. But I didn't. I simply ignored their messages, and that was that. I haven't a clue what transpired after that. They still haven't contacted me directly. My mom did send some texts, but I didn't answer. Scarlett kept sharing pictures of her life online, and it actually made me feel even better about what I did. She never reached out to see if I was doing all right. She didn't even seem to realize that I wasn't the one they went to for help anymore. Honestly, I was okay with that. I was done with everything. I wasn't the one who always fixed everything this time around. I was the one who was letting go. It felt incredible. Perhaps I would never receive the family's acceptance that I always craved. But now I understood my value, And for the first time in ages, I was putting myself first. Where do I go from here? I have no idea, but I don't think I need their approval to go on.